First thing to notice is that when making kefir, there are two stages to it. The first stage is the first fermentation, the second stage is the second fermentation. As mentioned, the first fermentation is open to the air. It is an aerobic process. The second fermentation will be closed off. It's an anaerobic process. So in that first section, what you'll be doing is actually making the water kefir. The grains will be fermenting the sugar in the water into a water kefir. At that point, it's perfectly drinkable. That is water kefir, but it will be flat and it won't have all that much flavour. So what we'll want to do is then go to the second fermentation. That's where you're going to be adding flavour, but also a little bit of fizz, which is always nice. Now the way that you will do the second fermentation is by pouring what you got in the first fermentation. You'll filter out those kefir grains and use them again. But you will pour that water kefir into, and with any flavouring, into one of these bottles. So these bottles are ideal. They have already been used for a fizzy drink. These we've recycled. And they're closed off to the air. So once you've closed them, they'll be closed off to the air. That will be the second fermentation, will be done in a bottle like this. It can also be done in an old fizzy water bottle. Ideally glass, it can be plastic, I prefer glass for sure. If you're using an old bottle that doesn't have a stopper like that, you can use a tapered cork just to close that up. So as I said, this is where we're going to be adding the flavour. What we've added to your box is our seaweed tea. That we'll be using as a flavouring. I'll show you how to do that later. The next point to mention is sugar. Sugar is a really important part of this process. Now, the ideal sugar to use is organic cane sugar. You don't need to use that. You can just use unrefined white sugar. Here we've just got some unrefined white sugar. We're just going to show you how you can use it really simply. What you don't want to be using is unrefined brown sugar. Unrefined brown sugar tends to denature the grains and it will make them go mushy after a while and they'll die. The next thing to mention is water. Now you want to be using filtered water. The important thing here is that the water doesn't have any chlorine. Chlorine really damages your grains. So there are a few different methods to dechlorinate, unchlorinate your water. One thing is to use a charcoal filter. Just an ordinary charcoal filter tends to filter out pretty much all of the chlorine from your water. That's the ideal scenario. If you don't have one of those, what you can do is you can boil water for 15 minutes and then allow it to cool. That tends to get rid of pretty much all your chlorine. You can also leave water, tap water this is, you can leave it uncovered for 24 hours. That allows the chlorine to evaporate. Lastly, if you don't have any of those, you can use bottled water. An interesting thing that you can also do is use coconut water. So don't be tempted to not put as much sugar in there because you think that coconut water has some natural sugars in there. But the same amount of sugar, you'll just be swapping out the water element for coconut water. If you're using coconut water, look for coconut waters that have the fewest ingredients on the back. So ones that are really natural coconut, and use the ones that have no coconut pulp or bits in them. Another thing to look at is the location that you're fermenting in. So it needs to be out of direct sunlight. Sunlight has an antimicrobial effect, so that will kill your grains over time. Put this in a cool place between 20 and 26 degrees Celsius. That's around room temperature. And what you want to do is also put this away, about a metre away from any other fermented products. So if you're making kombucha at home, you might be making any other pickles. You also want to put it about a metre away from your food waste bin. That can have a bit of mould around it, so we want to keep everything away from that. Your kefir grains might float to the top. They might sit at the bottom. Both of those are perfectly natural. You don't need to worry about them at all. What we'll be doing with this process is leaving them for 48 hours. So they might sink, they might float, everything's normal. Lastly, focusing on what you're using to handle your grains. Some people talk about not using any metal at all in this process. Now, most of our utensils nowadays are stainless steel. So if you're sure that your utensils are stainless steel, those are perfectly safe. Wood is perfectly safe as well. as is glass, so glass measuring jugs, things like that. But if you're using a sieve, most of our sieves nowadays are stainless steel. The problem with using an older sieve that might be made of copper or something like that is that those minerals can tend to leach into the grains. Now, it's only important if you're holding those in there for quite a while. If they're just touching them for a second, absolutely fine. That's that process. Those are my tips and tricks. In the next section, I'm going to be talking to you about what's in your box and how to make cafe.